Thank you so much for doing this, man. We really, really appreciate it. It's so awesome. The movie is amazing. And I guess I'll start off with saying that I love how the film sort of lulls us into a false sense of security. In other words, it kind of starts off as this like atypical 80s romantic comedy, replete with all these sort of character tropes we all know and love. But as the film progresses, it becomes much darker, and for me, much more profound. And I just want to know, what was your inspiration for writing the film?
Well, probably to get rid of all the nightmares that my generation had of nuke nightmares. We were trained in school to duck, roll, and cover, and that this was inevitable, that this war was going to happen. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was, something, I was obsessed with the subject matter, and, I always loved Los Angeles at night and wanted to do something in real time, and, it was definitely intentional to start off with one movie and end up with another that you weren't expecting, which it's not the easiest film to get made in Hollywood then, and it's probably impossible today.
Yeah, which kind of brings me to my next question. That ending kind of stayed with me for a couple of days and left me feeling empty and sad inside, but in the best possible way. But I'm just curious as to how you got funded. I'm amazed that someone would back something like that, especially with the ending.
If I would have, even for Warner Brothers, who I wrote it for originally, if I would have had it wake up at the end and it was all a dream, I could have made it 8 years earlier on a much higher budget. But I wanted my characters to fall in love and drown in tar, so it took me 8 years. I don't know if it's a good idea, but that's what I did. I was very, monomaniacal about it.
Was it hard also finding funding as a first-time director on a feature film?
Yes and no. I mean, I had a weird career. I made a short film, dropped out of the AFI, and made a film noir black and white movie. And off of that was like in 1978, I got offered many features to direct off it. So I should have had a certain amount of, cachet to go direct a feature, but I wanted to make my film my way, and that was a harder thing to do. I turned down a lot of other films, actually, to try to get this made.
Well, working on a feature, I imagine, is a pretty intense process. So I guess, going back to the first-time feature film director thing, what were some of the obstacles you had to overcome on set, and especially with working with a low budget, and what were some of the things that you learned during production?
This was very difficult. It's all night shooting and then a dawn shot almost at the end of every night to go out and capture Los Angeles in the magic hour dawn. So 7 weeks shooting of nights for the most part. Very difficult. It was a $3.5 million budget, and some pretty big stuff we were trying to do. So even working, we couldn't even get a completion bond for a while. I had enormous pressure where if I got 2 days behind schedule, they were going to fire me, but somehow we stayed on schedule.
Could you kind of explain, I guess, for people who aren't in the film industry and not privy to that, what a completion bond is?
Well, you have to have a company that will guarantee it's going to finish on its schedule and budget. And if you get too far behind, if you get a week behind schedule or something on a short schedule, they can come in, fire the director. So I was sort of had the pressure of maybe being fired every day from shooting. So.
And one last thing before I turn it over to the audience. I mentioned earlier in the screening that the film was sort of proposed as a Twilight Zone movie.
That was Warner Brothers' idea, that they were looking for something to come out with a Twilight Zone movie, and they were the ones who wanted him. They sort of would let it play out okay, but then they wanted him to wake up at the end, and then it all started happening again. I don't think that would be very satisfying for a Twilight Zone movie or for Miracle Mile. So they let me buy it back, I must say. So.
How did you buy it back? I imagine it was expensive?
I wasn't paid that much to write. It was one of my first jobs, and I had a writing credit on Strange Brew, the Canadian movie, which I was going to direct, but it went as a Canadian movie. So I took every dollar they gave me on that, and I gave it to Warner Brothers. And a couple of years later, they offered me almost $500,000, which in the early '80s was sort of the top money any screenwriter got, to sell it, to not direct, and I turned it down. That too, so I don't know.
Does anyone have any questions? you in the beard. You come up here.
I actually have a question about Kurt Fuller's character in the film. He's the one on the roof who kind of loses his mind, and Kurt Fuller is really, really disturbing in this film. And I think you did a great job of implying what he's been up to on the roof.
Oh.
But maybe you could talk to us a little bit more about that. I mean, at least for me, obviously drug use, drinking, but also there's a really heavy implied kind of rape up there.
Yeah, I know this question, is he having sex with a dead girl or not? And could be.
Was that his idea or yours?
Yeah, was that his idea or yours?
A lot of people, when the film came out, sort of complained about the amount of chaos and horrible things people were doing, when they found out the world was ending. And then a few years later, the LA riots happened, and it looked exactly like the end of Earth Mile. So,
Does anyone else have any questions?
I love how it starts out at the La Brea Tar Pits and then it ends at the La Brea Tar Pits, and there seems to be sort of a circle of life kind of message that civilization evolved and then it's all going back to the muck. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, that was the idea. Yeah, I always was going to start and end at the Tar Pits. It went through some incarnations of different characters, but it was always sort of the same schematic of beginning at the Tar Pits and ending there. It does have a dreamlike quality where, that's sort of you're out, that maybe this was all a dream, but I didn't give you that out. So.
Camera up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be too political, but I grew up kind of during the same time you did, where we thought, I was in Houston, we figured 25 minutes for the port to get bombed, and now the Soviet Union doesn't exist, but all of those bombs and a lot more still do. And
you're absolutely right. That's actually much more possible to happen now than it was then.
Well, that's what I was worried about.
So don't think it's a nostalgic,
Yeah.
80s movie, 50s movie.
Okay.
It's actually, there's a guys in a silo in Russia who haven't been paid in 6 months with a bottle of vodka, ready to go. Fuck it,
Well, I was just worried that, okay, thank you. I feel much better
now. Sleep tight, yes.
What inspired you to start with a romance, then kind of go into chaos? I was wondering about that. What made you think it started as a romance? Start the movie as a romance.
What was it?
Oh, he asked, what made you want to start the movie as a romance and kind of follow up with chaos?
I don't know. That was just always the intention to, have a great day starting and then have a not so great day, that night, and just to count your blessings, what is possible in life. The original script was really was two older people, who hadn't seen each other in 15 years. That reconciliation story of the grandparents was actually always the main story at one point. So.
Oh, okay. Makes sense now.
Does anyone else have any more questions?
How did you get the bird to catch the cigarette?
It was a stunt bird. It took, 3 years of training. I don't know, we had an animal person on the set. They trained it to do that. So.
Did you pay the bird in cigarettes?
Did you pay the bird in cigarettes?
I don't think it inhaled. I'm sure they were tea or something.
Does any more questions?
Did the yuppies take over Miracle Mile?
Have they now?
Yeah.
Yeah, yuppies take over everything. Yeah, those condos used to be primarily old people, and now they are, yuppie scum condos.
What did Anthony Edwards and Mayor Winningham think of the ending, or the movie as a whole? How did you find them?
They loved it. I mean, I couldn't have made this without them. They were so great to work with. I think they make a great couple. He's sort of a Jimmy Stewart-ish guy, and she's making sort of make anything believable. I would like to CGI her hairdo in 80s clothes.
I don't think so. That makes it for me, man. That's amazing.
A little too much 80s, in there.
Any more questions from anybody?
Ask them what they shot on.
We have a film. Hold on a second.
Somebody who lived in LA for a while, and you captured that that Fairfax, Wilshire area really well at night, and that desolation. And you said you wanted to shoot LA at night and capture something. What is it that you really wanted to capture when you shot that film about LA at night?
Just the way that it's absolutely dead. People go to sleep at 10 o'clock in LA. It's a very dead town, and it's the middle of the night. There's very few people on the street, so it does have that dreamlike quality. And we do have this interesting, deco architecture that I think looks especially haunting in the middle of the night or at dawn.
Actually, that gentleman just reminded me of another film that stylistically in some ways is similar to yours. Into the Night with Jeff Goldblum kind of concentrates on that same dreamlike quality of night in Los Angeles. And I guess that was made in the 80s as well. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, with Michelle Pfeiffer. Yeah, I remember seeing that. I would like to see that again. I haven't seen that since it came out.
It's a good flick, but he just reminded me of that. That it's so interesting to see two of those films, both in the 80s, that, both of the films capture that so well. I've only been to LA once, and I only got to hang around Venice Beach, but especially that dreamlike quality. But was it difficult shooting at night like that? Like, what kind of challenges do you guys kind of have to face down when you're shooting at night like that?
It's just very expensive. You have to light up city blocks, so it's not a simple little indie film to go out there and film. You need big lighting situations. I had a great DP, Teo Bondasante, and he made it all work. So.
Cool, thank you.
I guess there's a ton of artwork hanging up in the front of the theater. We were wondering if you could talk a little bit about those concepts and how early on those were conceived and how you think they translate into your final product.
Some of them are pretty close. Paul Chadwick, who's a comic book guy now for Dark Horse, does Concrete. A Dark Horse comic did those. He was my storyboard artist too. And those were done, years in advance, and I would always make a color Xerox and put them in the script, just so when that scene came up, somebody had a good visual idea of what I wanted to go for. If you look closely at all of them, there's a shopping cart in each one too.
Any more questions? Anybody? Okay, I think for me, Steve, I'm interested in how you guys were able, because I imagine shooting on location in LA is pretty expensive, right?
It's even more so. Somehow I got all the locations that I wrote it into, and I was very lucky. I don't think I could do that today.
No, and I'm amazed you guys were able to stretch that $3 million budget. Was it? Did they? I don't know. Did a lot of it have to do with favors, or were they really accepting of you guys to go shoot in those locations, or did you have? Obviously you didn't have to pay a shit ton of money, but how did you pull that off?
You had a budget, and we spent it. I went out later and shot a lot of pickup shots, on my own dime until I couldn't borrow any more money. But basically, we had a budget and had to live within it. So.
Anybody else? Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. The movie's amazing. A big inspiration for me as a filmmaker. I guess actually my final question is how was it received when it came out? Because I know the movie has a cult following now, and I feel like filmmakers don't set out to make cult films. And so when it first came out, was it poorly received?
It actually made its money back, so it didn't lose money, and like the New York critics, London critics, it got a lot of great reviews, and then it got some terrible reviews, and as you said, it has a cult following, but there's also people who just absolutely hate it. It's a very frustrating movie, so I at least like to get a strong response either way. So.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you.
We love you.